Hi, this is the introduction video to a series of videos that I'll be posting about the brain and the central nervous system. It's going to be mini tutorials, so it's easy to digest rather than throwing too much information into one video. So first of all, we're going to talk about directional terms. So there's this first picture, it's very clear, but I'll go through it. So the first one is the lateral. Lateral is when you read the brain from the side. Right now we're looking at it from the right side, and I'm gonna add this onto it. So the hemispheres. Right now we're looking at it from the right hemisphere. So the hemisphere, when it comes to the brain, there are two halves. You know that. So the right hand side is the right hemisphere. Left hand side is the left hemisphere. So in this picture we're looking at the brain from the right hemisphere. And the second one is ventral. Ventral is when you look at it from the bottom. So you can see the brain stem right there. That's the clear indicator. So the mid-sagittal is, like I said before, there are two halves of the brain. So when you cut it in the middle, you separate the two halves, and when you look at one half from not the lateral side, but the other side, that's mid-sagittal. Dorsal is when you look at the brain from the top, so you can see that two halves very clearly. There's a little gap in the middle. So you have the left and the right side, left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. Okay, so the next picture. The brain, you can see it from the left hand side now, and so it's the left hemisphere. In this image, we can see the brain divided into different sections. These are called lobes. So the frontal lobe, you can see that in the yellow bit at the front. This is if you put your hand on your head near the forehead, so that section. This is very good when you're revising and when you have to remember which lobe is where. You can just put your hand and just run it down to the back of your head and just remember it like that. So the frontal lobe at the front have very important functions, including thinking, planning, organizing, problem solving, and takes care of your emotions, behavior control, and your personality. So very important. And then parietal lobe is responsible for perception, making sense of the world, and spellings. Then you have the occipital lobe. This section is responsible for your vision. So this is connected to your eyes. So you see everything and it's processed by this lobe. And then we have the temporal lobe. This takes care of memory and understanding language. And then you have the brain stem, and it also includes the medulla oblongata, which is responsible for your breathing, heart, and respiration. So let's talk about the brain. Why do we have a brain and the functions of it? So the central nervous system, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more later, includes the brain and the spinal cord. So the brain is responsible for receiving sensory signals, so sensory information, and coming up with a response towards that signal. So, for an example, say that we've touched something very hot, and then the brain comes up with a response to take your hand off of it. And also, it stores memory. So, we did talk about temporal lobe earlier, and I did mention that is responsible for memory. So it stores memory, long term and short term, and the differences and where it stores and everything will come up in the next videos. And it also carries out thoughts. So we did talk about the frontal lobe being responsible for personality, emotions, and everything. So this is part of that. So everything that you think of, which can also be connected to the temporal lobe where the memory is stored. See, all of these are interconnected. That's how we function. So now we're going to talk about the central nervous system. So in this picture you can see the nervous system, but the nervous system is divided into two sections. So the brain and the spinal cord is part of the central nervous system, and the nerves that comes out of it belongs to the peripheral nervous system. So as the nervous system divides into two sections, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, the central nervous system includes the brain and the spinal cord. The responsibility of the central nervous system is to receive and process information and initiating an action appropriate for those information that's received. So this information that is received to the central nervous system comes as sensory information, so from your sense organs. And the spinal cord conducts signals to and from the brain and also controls reflex activities. So the peripheral nervous system, I'm going to refer to it as PNS for short. It transmits signals between the central nervous system and the rest of the body. So further down within the PNS, we have motor neurons and sensory neurons. So the motor neurons control voluntary movements by activating skeletal muscles, and the sensory neurons carry signals to the central nervous system from the sensory organs. So before we talked about the central nervous system processing information, and this information comes as sensory information. So this information is carried through the sensory neurons in the PNS. And then we have within the PNS, within the motor neurons, we have somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. So the somatic nervous system is related to the body, the skeletal muscles and the joints, and it controls voluntary movements by activating the skeletal muscles. And then we have the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system involves internal organs. So it controls involuntary responses by influencing organs, glands, and smooth muscles. So this autonomic nervous system then divides into sympathetic division and parasympathetic division. So the sympathetic division is responsible for the classic fight or flight response. So it arouses the body and it takes it to that emergency system, so the fight or flight response. And the parasympathetic, it quiets the body down, so it relaxes the body. And it's mostly activated after an emotional event. So during the fight or flight response, you have pupil dilation, reduced salivation, an increased heart rate, and reduced digestion in your stomach, because it's not very important to be digesting food while you're trying to fight something or run away from something. So it reduces that. It reduces useless actions that's not supposed to be taking place while you're trying to get away from something. And then you have the parasympathetic nervous system. Within the parasympathetic, we have the parasympathetic division. So that's, like I said, is the relaxation. So it conserves energy. So that includes pupil constriction, increased salivation, reduced heart rate, and the increase of digestion. So now you're okay, now you're relaxed, so you can carry on your normal bodily functions. So in the next video, I will go more into details of the central nervous system and its functions and how it works, and neurons. So thank you so much for listening. I hope this helped, and I will see you with the next video. Thank you.